Husband called me a worthless and lazy burden and divorced me for being jobless, until I fired him. Please stay with me as I tell my story. And please, do not forget to support our channel by subscribing to our channel, liking our videos, and sharing your loved ones. Your support means the world to us. Now to our story. Poke. It happened on a Tuesday evening, the night he came home with that look in his eyes. Without a word, he pulled off my wedding ring, tossed it into the kitchen trash, and said I was nothing but a parasite. He told me a real woman would earn her own money, not sit around while he worked. The words stung, but it was the coldness in his voice that cut the deepest. I thought back to all the years I had put his needs first, turning down promotions so we could move for his career, working part-time so I could manage our home, supporting him through late nights while he built his reputation. I believed we were a team. Somewhere along the way, that belief became mine alone. His comments grew sharper over time. Small digs about my clothes, my lack of income, my easy life. The man I had loved slowly became a stranger who treated me like a burden. Then, on my birthday, he booked a fancy restaurant. I thought maybe we were turning a corner. Instead, halfway through dinner, he slid a thin envelope across the table. Divorce papers. He didn't even look at me when I asked why. I cried for days. The humiliation and grief were heavy, but anger started to grow underneath. If I had given up my dreams for him once, I could build new ones without him. Quietly, I updated my resume, reached out to old contacts, and took short courses online. I told no one, not even my closest friends, because I didn't want pity. Weeks later, I got an unexpected call. A top competitor to his company was looking for someone to lead a new project. They had heard of my organizational skills from a past client. The pay was excellent, the challenge exciting, and the irony was delicious. I accepted on the spot. I kept my head down and worked hard, learning the business and gaining trust. Then came an opportunity. A major client was considering switching from my ex-husband's firm to ours. I led the pitch, armed with a deep understanding of the client's needs and the weaknesses in his company's approach. It wasn't about revenge, at least not at first, but when the contract was signed in our favor, I won't deny the satisfaction. A month later, he asked to meet. He wanted to talk about the past and hinted at opportunities for us to work together. I listened politely, then stood up. I told him I had a meeting to get to. His face fell as I walked away, smiling, not because I had hurt him, but because I had finally left his shadow behind. We met when we were both young and certain we'd conquer the world together. He had big dreams, and I believed in every one of them. When he got into a top graduate program across the country, I packed up without hesitation. I found a small job to help with bills, kept the apartment running, and made sure he had the time and focus he needed to succeed. I told myself this was our journey, and we'd share the rewards later. After graduation, he landed a well-paying job in a new city. We moved again, and I left my own career behind because his hours were unpredictable and someone had to keep the household steady. I cooked, cleaned, managed our finances, and hosted his colleagues when needed. At first, he seemed grateful. Then new friends entered the picture, people who liked to joke about me being just a housewife. At first, he'd brush it off, but over time I noticed the shift. He started making the same comments at home. His tone changed. Little criticisms slipped into every conversation. If the laundry wasn't folded a certain way, if dinner wasn't on time, if I spent too much on groceries, he let me know I was failing. It wore me down until the day he announced he wanted a divorce. No long discussion, no real explanation, just a flat statement that he needed more. With no savings of my own, I had to find work quickly. My first job paid little, but I learned fast, handling schedules, negotiating with vendors, solving problems on the fly. Those skills caught the attention of a recruiter from a fast-growing startup. They offered me a position with better pay and real potential. I grabbed it. The work was intense, but I thrived. My input was valued, and I began leading projects. Months into the job, a major opportunity came up, a partnership with a client who, if secured, could dominate the market. I worked on the pitch with focus, digging into details and anticipating every question. It wasn't until later that I discovered the twist. This partnership would directly threaten my ex-husband's company. I didn't let it shake me. This was business, and my responsibility was to the team that had given me a chance. When the day came to present, I kept my composure, laying out our plan with clear numbers and solid strategy. The client signed with us. The news spread quickly in our industry. A week later, my phone rang. It was him. His voice was softer than I remembered, full of forced warmth. He talked about the old days, hinting that we could help each other. I listened, let him speak, then told him the truth, that I don't work for free anymore. There was silence on the line before he muttered something about being busy and hung up. I didn't need an apology. The real victory was knowing I'd built something of my own, without his approval, without his support, and certainly without his control. The night he walked out, I had $200 in my account and nowhere to go. I packed a single bag and ended up on a friend's couch. At night, when the house was quiet, I would turn my face toward the wall and cry so no one could hear. It hadn't always been this way. Before our marriage, I had a career I loved, steady income, travel, and my own apartment. When he asked me to move to another state so he could take a job offer, I agreed. I told myself it was temporary, that I'd get back on track once we settled. But life shifted. I handled our home, kept his schedule, and made sure he had everything he needed to succeed. Years passed, and my career faded into something I barely recognized. Now, without him, I had to start from scratch. I took the first job I could find, waiting tables at night. Then another, cleaning offices early in the morning. Each role, no matter how small, taught me something: how to manage time, speak with different kinds of people, solve problems quickly. One afternoon, while serving coffee, I met a woman who ran her own marketing. She noticed how I organized the orders and handled a demanding table with ease. She struck up a conversation, then offered me a part-time job doing administrative work for her business. I took it immediately. She became a mentor, showing me how client relationships worked, how to manage budgets, and how to pitch services. Soon, I was taking on small projects myself, designing social media campaigns for local shops and helping them bring in customers. The extra income helped me move out of my friend's place into a tiny studio. Over time, my side business became my main focus. I built a small team, each of us bringing in our own clients. Word spread, and we began attracting bigger accounts. Then came the moment I didn't see coming. Our firm was invited to bid on a major contract renewal for a national company. When I read the file, my heart stopped. This was my ex-husband's biggest client, the one that kept his company afloat. I didn't hesitate. I prepared the proposal carefully, outlining clear strategies and results we could deliver. When it came time to negotiate, I stayed calm, confident in what we offered. They signed with us. The loss hit his company hard, and within weeks, the industry knew. Our win brought media attention. Articles called us a rising name in marketing, and new clients started calling. On the night we officially launched our biggest campaign, my team gathered in our small office with takeout and champagne. We raised our glasses, not just to the project, but to how far we had come. As I looked around at the people who had helped me rebuild, I felt a steady pride. I hadn't just survived, I had turned rock bottom into the foundation for something far stronger. He leaned back in his chair, signing the divorce papers with a smug smile, as if this was a game he had already won. He didn't look at me once. I sat still, holding my breath, remembering the first time he had called me lazy. It had been a small argument about chores, but the word had stayed in my mind, sharp and cold. Months later, the truth about his affair came out. It wasn't whispered gossip, it was public. He had been seeing a younger coworker, and their photos were everywhere online. Friends avoided eye contact. Strangers gave me pitying looks. I felt stripped of dignity. I withdrew from social events and avoided calls, but instead of falling apart, I made a choice. If he had decided to throw me aside, I would use the time to build something for myself. I began taking online courses, marketing strategies, business compliance, negotiation skill. At night, while the city slept, I read industry reports and studied case studies. It took months, but the effort paid off. A recruiter noticed my work from a professional forum and offered me an interview. The position was with a major competitor to my ex-husband's company. The salary was more than I had ever earned, and the role came with real influence. I accepted without hesitation. From the first day, I immersed myself in projects. My attention to detail caught my boss's eye, especially when I spotted irregularities in documents from competing firms. One file in particular stood out. It was connected to my ex-husband's company. The numbers didn't match industry standard. I checked again, then quietly gathered more information. The evidence pointed to clear violations of regulations. I didn't make it personal. I treated it like any other professional duty. I passed the information to the appropriate authorities and stepped back, letting the process unfold. The investigation was swift. Within weeks, his company was under heavy scrutiny. Reports spread quickly, and industry contacts began pulling away from him. By the end of the quarter, he had been removed from his position. During that same period, my own responsibilities grew. I was promoted to a senior role, overseeing a team and handling high-value accounts. The contrast between us couldn't have been sharper. Months later, I attended a major networking event. The room was full of executives, clients, and media. I moved through the crowd with confidence, shaking hands and discussing new projects. Then I saw him across the room. He looked older, more tired, standing on the edge of a group that wasn't really paying attention to him. I walked past him without slowing down, the conversation I was in flowing easily. I didn't need to say a word. The difference between us was clear to everyone in the room. For the first time in years, I felt entirely free. He came home one evening, tossed a suitcase at my feet, and told me to earn my keep somewhere else. There was no warning, no discussion, just a blunt dismissal. I packed what I could and found a small apartment with rent I could barely manage. After groceries and bills, my bank account was nearly empty each month. A few weeks later, a friend called with an opportunity. A local company needed a temporary administrative assistant. It wasn't glamorous, but it was a steady paycheck. I took it, determined to make the most of it. From the start, I organized files, streamlined schedules, and fixed small issues no one else bothered to address. My attention to detail didn't go unnoticed. Within 3 months, my temporary role became permanent, and I was promoted to a coordinator position. The pace was demanding, but I enjoyed the challenge. I learned quickly, building strong relationships with managers and clients. One afternoon, during a strategy meeting, my boss mentioned a rival company that was struggling. When he said the name, I recognized it immediately. It was where my ex worked. He had been in charge of a key division there, but the numbers showed his team was underperforming badly. The conversation shifted toward potential acquisition. If our company moved fast, we could take control of their assets and client base. The idea was ambitious, and leadership needed someone organized and unflinching to handle the transition. My boss looked directly at me and said I should lead the project. I prepared meticulously. We reviewed contracts, met with potential investors, and planned every stage of the takeover. It was business, but I couldn't ignore the irony. This was the same man who told me I was useless, now about to lose his position because of a deal I was running. When the acquisition was announced, my name was in every press release as the lead coordinator. Trade publications highlighted my role, and industry contacts reached out to congratulate me. Meanwhile, his company's leadership made swift changes. He was one of the first to be let go. A few weeks after the deal closed, I visited the newly integrated office space. The building had once been his domain. Now, it was part of my daily responsibilities. I walked through the halls, greeting staff, checking progress on new systems, and settling into the corner office that had been reassigned to me. I set my coffee on the desk, leaning back in the chair. The view from the window stretched across the city, the same one he must have looked at every day. Except now it was mine. I didn't feel anger or even triumph, just a quiet satisfaction. I had taken the opportunity, worked hard, and proved myself in ways he never imagined I could. And I planned to keep going, one strong step at a time. The certified letter came on a rainy afternoon. Inside were divorce papers, the reason listed in cold, typed words. Financial incompatibility. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at them, thinking of all the years I had worked without pay, managing the bills, cooking meals, keeping the house running while he built his career. None of it counted now. When the shock faded, I realized I had to manage my own life for the first time in years. I started learning bookkeeping, figuring it would help me keep track of my limited income and expenses. I watched tutorials, practiced on free software, and got better each week. The skill turned into an idea. I began offering freelance accounting services to small businesses, local shops, independent contractors, and friends who needed help organizing their finances. The work was steady, and I liked the independence. One day, while meeting a client in a cafe, I was introduced to a CEO who ran a mid-sized manufacturing company. He mentioned his search for a trustworthy financial officer, someone who could find hidden inefficiencies and tighten operations. I explained what I did, and after a long conversation, he asked me to come in for a formal meeting. I took the job, not realizing until weeks later that my new employer's main competitor was my ex-husband's company. I didn't dwell on it. My focus was on doing the work well. While reviewing bids for a major contract, I noticed glaring inefficiencies in the competitor's proposal. They were overestimating costs and missing key details that mattered to the client. I put together a detailed report, showing how our company could deliver the same results for less while maintaining quality. We presented the plan, and the client switched to us. It was a huge win, one that everyone in the industry noticed. I knew what the loss would mean for my ex's company, but I didn't let it distract me from the next steps in my role. A week later, the receptionist at our office called to say someone was asking for me. It was him. I told her I wasn't available. She offered to have him wait, but I asked her to let him know I was busy and couldn't meet. I didn't need to see him. My life was full with work I was proud of, a team that valued me, and goals that were mine alone. At the end of the quarter, I received my first six-figure bonus check. The number in my hands felt like proof of everything I'd rebuilt. I slipped it into an envelope, addressed it to him, and mailed it without a note. He'd understand the message without words. I no longer measured my worth by his approval, and my success spoke for itself. He looked me in the eye one night and said I'd never make it without him. The words were meant to cut, and they did, but they also lit something inside me. Within a month, I packed what I could into my car and drove to another state. I didn't know anyone there, but I knew I couldn't build a future if I stayed in his shadow. The first months were hard. I worked mornings in a small cafe and evenings at a local store just to cover rent and groceries. My days were long, but I saved enough to enroll in night classes for project management. Sitting in those classrooms after a full day of work was exhausting, but I stayed focused. Each assignment felt like a small step toward the life I want. One evening, during a group presentation, a visiting executive sat in on the class. I didn't know who he was until after, when he introduced himself and asked about my background. He said he was impressed by how I broke down complex problems and made them easy to understand. A week later, he called with a job offer. It wasn't until my first day in the new role that I learned the twist. The branch I was hired to manage had been run by my ex-husband before being labeled a failure. The numbers were bad, morale was low, and corporate had little hope for a turnaround. I threw myself into the work. I met with every employee, asked for honest feedback, and set clear goals. We fixed internal processes, built better relationships with clients, and celebrated small wins. Within a year, the branch went from near closure to the most profitable in the company. Industry news picked up the story. Articles highlighted the dramatic turnaround, naming me as the driving force behind the success. Not long after, word reached me that my ex had been demoted as his old failures came back into focus. A few months later, I attended a national conference. As I was speaking with colleagues, I saw him walking toward me. He tried to start a casual conversation, acting as if nothing had happened. I met his eyes briefly, then turned back to the people I'd been talking to. The moment passed, and he drifted away. The final night of the conference, I was called to the stage to accept an award for outstanding leadership. As I walked under the bright lights, I thought about the night he told me I'd never make it. The room was full of applause, but I didn't need it to know the truth. I had already proved him wrong by building something entirely my own. I was walking past the living room when I heard him speaking to his friends. He laughed and called me dead weight, saying I didn't bring anything to the table. They laughed with him, and I stood there in the hallway silent, feeling the words settle deep. I didn't argue. I didn't let him know I'd heard. Instead, I decided to quietly change my life. I'd always been good with my hands, sewing, crafting, making small home decorations. That week, I took a few photos of my work and posted them online for sale. Orders trickled in at first, but each one gave me hope. I stayed up late making pieces, learning how to package them nicely, and keeping track of every sale. Within a year, my store had a steady following. Lifestyle magazines began featuring my designs, and online blogs wrote about my work. The exposure brought more customers, and I realized I needed help keeping up with demand. I hired a small team and started thinking bigger. The next step was wholesale. We began shipping to boutiques in different states. I worked closely with each store, making sure they had unique pieces that fit their style. Soon, my brand was recognized in places I'd never even visited. One afternoon, I received an email from a luxury retailer interested in carrying my line nationwide. When I researched the company, I discovered it was owned by the family of my ex's new girlfriend. The irony was sharp, but I approached it as I would any other business opportunity, professionally and without emotion. We negotiated for weeks. I made sure the deal gave me complete control over my products and branding, with no involvement from anyone connected to my past. The contract was finalized exactly on my terms. A few months later, he reached out. His tone was warm, almost friendly, as if the years in between had softened everything. He said he'd seen my brand everywhere and suggested we collaborate on future projects. I read the message twice, then sent a short reply. Thank you for the interest. My business communications are handled through my office email. I didn't hear from him again. By the time the new line launched with the luxury retailer, my products were in stores across the country. I booked a solo vacation to Italy, something I'd dreamed of for years but never thought I could afford. On my last night in Florence, I sat at a small cafe overlooking the Arno River. The city glowed in the evening light, and the air was warm. I thought about where I had started, quietly making crafts at my kitchen table, and how far I had come. I didn't feel anger or even pride, just a deep sense of peace. I had built something entirely my own, and I didn't need him, or anyone, to know my worth. The courthouse was quiet the morning I signed the last of the divorce papers. The judge's words faded into the background as I thought about the years behind me, years of relying on him for every bill, every decision, and hearing over and over that I wasn't capable of doing more. The weight of those memories pressed down, but under it was a spark of determination. That same week, I started searching for ways to build a career from scratch. Coding caught my attention. It was a skill in demand, and I liked the idea of creating something from nothing. I enrolled in an intensive boot camp, spending long days in class and longer nights practicing. 3 months later, I landed my first job at a small tech firm. The pay wasn't high at first, but I learned quickly, taking on extra projects and studying new programming languages in my free time. The more I learned, the more confident I felt. An idea started forming, a mobile app that solved a problem I'd faced myself. I worked on it after hours, testing features, fixing bugs, and refining the design. When I finally released it, I expected a modest response. Instead, downloads grew every day. Positive reviews poured in, and word spread fast. Soon, the app caught the attention of investors. Emails came from venture capital firms, industry leaders, and even large corporations. Among them was an offer from my ex-husband's employer, proposing to buy the app outright. The amount was tempting, but I knew what accepting it would mean, putting my work into the hands of people connected to a past I'd left behind. I declined, not quietly, but in a public statement that outlined my vision for the app's future and my commitment to keeping control. The response was overwhelming. Local media picked up the story, calling it a tale of resilience and independence. Interviews followed, and my name became familiar in the business community. With the publicity came more serious offers, this time from companies I respected. I negotiated carefully, making sure every term worked in my favor. Months of discussions led to a partnership deal worth millions, giving me both financial security and the resources to expand. On the day I signed the contract, I thought back to that morning in the courthouse. Then, I'd walked out unsure of what my life would look like. Now, I sat at a polished table in a glass-walled office, pen in hand, surrounded by a team that believed in what we were building. As the final signature dried, I realized losing him hadn't been an ending. It had been the start of everything. I'd gone from being dependent to running a business that was entirely mine, with a future that stretched far beyond anything I'd imagined. I came home one afternoon to find a note on the kitchen counter. It was short, written in his quick handwriting. "You're on your own." No explanation, no conversation, just that. I stood there in silence, letting the words sink in, then began packing my things. The weeks that followed were about survival. I took whatever work I could find, bartending at night, assisting in a small shop during the day. The hours were long, but I saved enough to enroll in an online marketing certification program. Each lesson gave me tools I knew I could use to build something better for myself. When I completed the course, I applied everywhere and finally landed a spot at a small startup. The team was young, driven, and willing to try new ideas. I threw myself into the work, creating campaigns, analyzing results, and suggesting bold strategies. Within a year, our revenue had tripled. One day, the CEO announced we were preparing for a major pitch. The client was high profile, and winning them could change our company's future. When I saw the name, my stomach tightened. It was the firm my ex now worked for. They were also competing for the same contract. I didn't let it shake me. I knew the industry, and I knew enough about how he operated to anticipate his approach. Nothing I used was confidential, just patterns I'd seen when I was by his side at industry events and listening to his calls. I focused on building a proposal that covered what I knew they would miss, offering solutions that were sharper, cleaner, and more efficient. During the pitch, I stayed calm, presenting each point with confidence and answering every question directly. The client responded well, leaning in when I explained how our plan would deliver faster results without unnecessary costs. By the time we left the room, I could feel we had won them over. A week later, we got the news. The client had signed with us. Industry chatter spread quickly, pointing out that my ex's firm had lost to a much smaller competitor. His name came up in articles, criticized for the failure. I didn't celebrate his loss, but I couldn't ignore the irony. Months later, as our company continued to grow, I thought back to that note he had left me. My life had changed completely since then, not because I chased revenge, but because I worked for something better. The sweetest part wasn't that we had beaten his firm. It was walking into the office every morning knowing I had built my place there with skill and effort, not anyone's permission. Revenge had never been my plan. Success was. And it turned out, it was the best answer I could have given him.